Good night, Linda. Hey everybody, happy Torch Thursday tutorial stream. How is everybody doing? It appears that our special guest left us a note on the whiteboard behind me, so just in case anybody was wondering, Ace is apparently the best, so saith the whiteboard. I do tend to agree with the whiteboard in this particular instance, but we are not teaching the Ace is Best tutorial because, you know, that's just knowledge way bigger than I could possibly contain in a single stream. So what we are teaching tonight is twisted wire stacking rings. Ring, singular. I'm only doing one. And of course, the key to making stacking rings instead of ring is make more than one. Make a nice little stack of 3 or 4 or 5. They're really fun, versatile. Also, if you are like myself, in that your fingers tend to change size with the seasons, or with your diet, or with the pandemic. It's always nice to have you know, little rings that you can put in front of rings that may be a little bit too big, or if they're a little bit too small for a certain finger, and then you move them to a smaller finger and they're a little bit too big. It's nice to have a little ring that you can use as a guard to put in front of something like that. So you can make this stacking ring without the stone or with the stone. It's up to you. And of course, this is the that's the project for tonight. So this is one of, good Lord, Smee is shouty tonight. She's VV excited apparently about everybody. So this is one of those, remember last week when I did that twisted wire earring tutorial, and I told you I was so excited by the technique when I first, did the original tutorial of that I then, just went whole hog and did a whole bunch of tutorials using exactly the same technique. So if I'm doing things tonight that seem similar to what I did last week, it's because they are. It's because it's pretty much exactly the same technique, just applied in a different fashion. Oh, Smee took a nap. That's why she's so excited. She's rested.
Oh no, unfair. Unfair advantage.
I know, right? Everyone here at Beading Dreams says not fair. Unfair advantage to the Smee, rested Smee. She's got extra plus points. We need to nerf the rested Smee because she's obviously OP. So, what do we need to do this evening's tutorial? You are going to need, as far as supplies go, it's really not a lot. You're going to need some 18 gauge wire, about 6 to 8 inches or so. You're going to need a cabochon and corresponding size bezel cup. And you're going to need some easy sterling silver solder. That is it for supplies. Of course, the tool list, since it is a soldering class, is a little bit more involved. You are going to need a torch. Of course, I have my Blazer butane torch, my favorite torch that I love to use. You are going to need flux and a brush with which to apply it. We'll talk about what that is and what it does at some point in the future when it's time for me to use it. You're going to need pickle and a pickle pot. I've got that off camera. I'm going to do the same thing. Talk about what that is and what it does when it comes time for us to use it. You're going to need a few hand tools. You're going to need your pliers. You're really just going to need your wire cutters tonight and your chain nose. You don't necessarily need your round nose, but they just kind of come as a set for me, so I usually have them all around. You're going to need a tweezers. This is going to be for moving solder and picking up hot things. You're going to need a flat file. So this is a file that's actually half round on one side and flat on the other, so I'm going to be using the flat side for my project this evening. You're going to need 2 cylindrical objects. Sorry, I'm trying to move. There we go. So I'm going to use 2 files, and I'm just going to use the handles of 2 of my needle files. You don't have to use needle files. You could use crochet hooks, you could use knitting needles, you could use metal skewers, like whatever you've got, but you just need something that's cylindrical and about 3 or so millimeters in diameter. And then, of course, you need your soldering surface, and you're going to need a ring mandrel, of course, because we are making a ring. So I'm going to start by taking my piece of wire, and like I said, I've got about 8 inches, which is overkill. You can probably do this with about 6 inches of wire, but once again, I scared the crap out of myself the other night when I made that necklace for a doll. So yeah, 8 inches of wire it is. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my 8 inches of wire and I'm going to bring it round so that my ends are coming straight in towards each other, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to solder this wire into a circle. Now, I need my ends to be meeting flush, and they absolutely are not meeting flush right now because of the way that I cut them. So I'm going to take my flat file, and I'm just going to place my file against the edge of my wire, and I'm just going to push it forward. And with with very little effort, I'm going to have a flat end. And then I'm going to repeat with my other side. I was wondering if that was what that was.
Yeah.
No, something else. And then I'm going to put my ends together and line them up like so. So now you can see that my ends are meeting much more flush and that they will actually stay together now without me having to hold them there. I'm going to set that on my soldering surface carefully. And there we go. And you want to make sure that it's lined up, because even if it's touching, it's going to solder together, but if it's misaligned, it'll solder misaligned, and we ideally don't want that. Alright, so there's my joint right there. Still use a little tweaking. There we go. Okay, so now it's ready for me to solder it closed. So I'm going to start by applying flux to my joint. So flux is this kind of white pasty substance, and what flux is it is a protectant for your metals. So when you heat any metal that's not pure silver or pure gold, and sterling silver of course is not pure silver, it is an alloy of sterling silver and copper, or usually it's copper. These days it can be other metals as well, because you've got all kinds of interesting silver alloys out there. But mine's just plain old silver copper, so 92.5% silver, 7.5% copper. And when you heat a metal that is alloyed with base metals, or that is a base metal itself, the first thing that's going to happen to the metal is it's going to turn black. It's going to oxidize. The problem with that is that that oxide layer creates a barrier through which your solder cannot flow. And so that, of course, since we're trying to get our solder to flow, means that it makes the whole process impossible. So the flux protects our metal from the oxide layer, and that allows our solder to flow. So I use a brand called Handy Flux. It's just a borax-based paste flux. It is poisonous, okay, so don't eat the flux. Just generally speaking, don't eat the crafting is a really good, really good strategy to abide by when you're doing things. So don't eat the flux, but it's inexpensive and easy to use. So two of my favorite features in any particular product are inexpensive and easy to use. So I've just painted the flux on my joint, so it's going to protect that area around the joint so I can solder it closed. I've got my sterling silver easy solder, and I like wire solder, so it basically just looks like a piece of 20 gauge sterling silver wire, but it's not. So make sure that you mark your solder so that you know that it's solder and not wire, because the thing about sterling silver solder... Megan! Hi, Megan! Thank you. Did you get your box of stuff? Because you should definitely have gotten it by now. Hopefully. So yeah, sterling silver solder is an alloy of silver, copper, and zinc. So what the zinc does is it lowers the melting point of the solder down below. Yay, Megan got her stuff. the melting point of the sterling silver wire. That's what allows this whole soldering process to work. Now, I do not need very much solder to close this joint, okay? Teeny, tiny piece of solder, all right? That right there is all that I need, that little bitty bit right there. That's all I'm gonna need to close my joint up. And then I'm gonna take my tweezers and I'm gonna position that piece of solder underneath my joint. So there's my joint. I'm gonna set my solder onto my soldering board, and then I'm just gonna ever so gently grab my bracelet and bring it up so that my solder is resting on my joint. So not everybody is good with the soldering technique, which is fine, but the reason that I like it is twofold. Number one, if it's underneath your metal, it doesn't tend to skip off when you start heating it, which anybody who has, you know, who will top transfer solder knows, like when you heat it and the flux starts to boil, a lot of times it'll just kick that solder right off of your piece, which is just a holy pain in the butt. Number two, there's a really good visual cue when that solder flows, because your piece, you're not just having to look for the action of that solder, you know, going mercury-like and flowing into the joint, but you actually will physically see your bracelet will drop down flat because that piece of solder that's been holding it up has liquefied, flowed into your joint. So it's a good kind of visual cue, especially if you have trouble figuring out when your solder is flowing. This is a good way to help you with that. Now, before I light my torch, of course, I'm just going to give you guys a real quick 5-point soldering safety lecture. Of course, I am not a credentialed anything as far as safety goes. I'm just some rando on the internet, so you don't have to listen to me. But in my years of teaching soldering, these are a few things that keep coming up again and again as far as having safe soldering workspaces at home and remaining safe in a community workspace. So, number one, do as I say, not as I do. Okay, keep 6 to 8 inches of clear space around your flame at all times. That means 6 to 8 inches where there's nothing that is flammable, nothing that is meltable. Yes, that includes webcams. No, I am not keeping 6 to 8 inches of distance with my webcam. Anyone who was here in the latter part of 2020 will recall the great webcam melting incident of the winter of 2020. It was very sad. I haven't melted another webcam since then. Let it be noted. All my equipment has survived intact except for that one cord that I melted with my soldering iron the other day, but that just went to one of my lights, so, you know, no big deal. It got toasted. It did get toasted, and not in the way we like on the Beading Dream stream. So 6 to 8 inches of clear space around your flame at all time. Number two, once you've had a flame going in your work area from that point forward, always assume that everything in your work area is hot enough to burn you, because it probably is, even if it doesn't look like it. Number three, ventilation is important. If you, the mic on the camera did work brilliantly still. Unfortunately, none of the rest of the camera worked. But yes, so let's see, where was I? Ventilation is important. If you find yourself coughing, hacking, wheezing, or feeling uncomfortable in the lung area after, oh my gosh, it was pretty hilarious, Beverly, honestly. Like, because at that point, what can you do but laugh when you've absolutely melted your technology on stream? I was doing the project, and it was a project that required a lot of heat, and all of a sudden I'm looking at my screen and I'm like, why is it all white? And yeah, I actually melted one of the internal lenses of the camera. It was pretty funny. I'm fairly certain that after saying a few choice words, I was even laughing hysterically. Because at that point, what else are you gonna do? You can't unmelt it. But anyway, alright, so yeah, if your lungs are uncomfortable after you've been soldering, you may need to move to an area with better ventilation. If you're not actively using your torch to solder, turn it off. These are very easy to ignite. They're very easy to extinguish. There's no reason to leave your torch burning while you walk away and do something else. And that just can create a, hey Barbara! And that can create a hazardous situation for sure. And of course, number 5, make sure you know where the fire extinguisher is. If you are in your own home workspace, you should have one in arm's reach. If you're in a community workspace, make sure you know where the fire extinguisher is. And of course, if you're in a community workspace, make sure you comply with all rules and regulations that are posted or verbally stated by somebody who is managing the workspace, because of course they're really just trying to keep everybody safe. So now that we have heard the 5-point soldering safety lecture, let's light some fire. Alright, I'm going to light my torch, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start heating my metal, and I'm gonna go all the way around my metal, slowly and steadily. So some of my metal's off camera, so you're just gonna have to, oh look, there's sparks flying towards my mic, that's exciting. You're just gonna have to imagine that part of it. And once my flux has turned clear, so notice that it kind of, oh, hi Lorraine. Let me solder this and then I'll tell you all about that. Okay, so once your flux has turned clear, then you're just going to focus on the joint, and there we go. So what happened was my solder liquefied, it flowed in my joint, and it bonded the two parts of my piece together. I've got a little bit of solder board goop on there, but that happens. So yes, we just had a question from Lorraine. Welcome to the stream. If you miss a live, are they available to rewatch? And the answer to that is absolutely 100%. You've now got 3 ways to rewatch our lives, actually. You can go to Facebook, which it looks like that's the platform that you are using. Just go to our page, Beading Dreams, and scroll down to videos, click see all, and you've basically got our entire history of class content out there. Like, you could spend the next, 7 weeks just watching classes back to back to back, and you probably still wouldn't get through all of them. We also have a YouTube channel, Beading Dreams. We've started putting content up there. That's a fairly recent thing for us, so there's not as much history on YouTube as there is on Facebook, but it does exist there. And then you can also, if Twitch is your preferred platform, you can go to our videos on our Twitch channel, which is Beading Dream, no S on Twitch, because at some point in the distant misty past, I forgot my password and I had to create a new account, except it wouldn't let me create a new account for Beading Dreams because that account already existed, though it seemed to be impossible for me to recover the password to the account. And there's about 6 weeks of history up on Twitch as well. So if you're looking to go way back in the Wayback Machine, Facebook is your best bet. Like, if you want to see some quality cat butt on stream, with my teaching, Facebook is definitely your vehicle for that. But if you're just looking to kind of explore a more recent history, Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch will work great for you. And if you need any more detailed instructions as to how to access that, feel free to message us directly on our Facebook page, and Heather, I can walk you through it. So I have soldered this closed, and it is cool enough for me to touch. Notice I did that slightly cautiously. Could have probably been more cautious, but cautious enough not to burn myself. And so now I'm going to take my oval that I made and I'm going to stretch it. And I'm going to put it in my 2 files, and I'm just going to stretch it, and I'm going to pull and twist. And so what works best for me in that, and I can't show this on camera just because of, the angle is if I pull it straight into my chest, because then I can actually pull. I'm pulling really hard with my, like my pectoral muscles. So I'm going to pull and I'm going to twist, and my goal here is to create this kind of like hairpin looking piece. Now, it doesn't have to be completely straight, that's not necessary, but you want it to be relatively straight. So once I've straightened it out, now I'm going to start twisting it. And the important thing when you're twisting it is that you keep pulling outward, okay? You've got to keep that pressure going, otherwise you're not going to get a uniform twist. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my files and I'm going to pull outward and I'm going to twist them. And it's a little bit awkward. Yes, there are less awkward ways you can do this. You can put it in a drill, and you can let the drill twist it for you. There are better ways to do this, but since this isn't something I do a ton, for me, it's easier to just grab 2 files and deal with the awkwardness. But if this is something you find yourself doing a lot, yes, there are better ways to do this. Now, one of the better ways to do it is don't try and put it under a camera. Putting it in front of me is a lot less awkward, but then you guys can't see it. So hence the problem with streaming. So this is where I am. I hit the wrong button, y'all. So this is where I am with this. So I want to get a little bit of a tighter twist, so I'm just going to keep going. Once again, just don't forget to pull outward while you're twisting, because otherwise you're going to get wonky twists. And nobody wants wonky twists. That's just terrible. Now, fun things you can do with this once you've twisted it. If you want to, you can hammer it flat. I'm going to use it just as is, but it is very fun if you hammer it flat or if you run it through a rolling mill and smash it down. It creates a very interesting texture. But for now, I'm just going to use it as is. So this is my piece of twisted sterling silver wire. Alright, so I soldered it, I twisted it, I've got a nice fairly even twist for most of it. Hey Corvus, welcome to the stream. It's a little looser down here at the end, but the good thing is I think I've made too much wire, so I don't need to use it all. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to find my ring mandrel, and I'm going to pick a size that is smaller than the size that I want to make. So I'm going for a 7. I'm going to go up 3 sizes to a size 4. And I'm going to take that, and that's because my wire is going to spring up a bit. And so if I put it at a size 7, it's going to be really hard. Ace is verifiably still alive. I promise that is not Heather typing on Ace's Twitch account. He does still exist here with us. He has not shuffled off this mortal coil. Look, see, proof of Ace life right there. He is not a mutilated corpse yet. I mean, there's still time. But at the moment, he's all good. So I've got my wire, and I'm just going to wrap it around my mandrel at my size. Like I said, it's a size 4. I'm going for a size 7, but watch what happens when I let this go. See how it springs up? And so it's significantly bigger than where I wrapped it around the mandrel. So ideally, I should be able to slide it down, and it's pretty good. It's a little bit bigger than a 7, so I'm going to just take this and just tighten it up just a fuzz. That was a word that my grandfather used. Just a fuzz. Fuzz and cattywampus. Those were 2 of his words. Okay, so there we go. So I've got my twisted wire wrapped around my mandrel. It's at my size 7. Now I'm going to fish out from the cord that is my supply drawers a marker. And I'm going to mark across like so, and then I can let go. So the mark is just so that I don't have to, unlike this afternoon stream where I made the wire ring, I don't have to be super precise about taking it off the mandrel because I've got now my marks, my Sharpie marks that are going to show me where to cut. And then I am going to cut, and remember when you're cutting something that you're going to solder, you got to pay attention to how your flush cutters are being used. The flat side of your flush cutter cuts a flush side, the non-flat side does not cut a flush side. So we want flat side on the part that's remaining. So this part here is the waist. That means I'm going to face the flat side of my cutters towards the other part of my ring, and I'm going to snip. And then I'm just going to turn my work around, and then if I turn my work around, the flat side of my cutters is still facing towards my non-waist side. I'm going to snip that, and now I have the base of my ring. Now I need to file these 2 edges of wire so that they meet flush, because even if you're using a really good flush cutter, you're never going to get a perfectly flush cut, because the way a flush cutter or any wire cutter works is just pinches your wire down and down and down until it gets so thin that it snaps off. The problem with that is there's always going to be a burr in the middle of your wire that's holding it apart. Now if you want to circumvent that, instead of using a cutter, you would cut that with a saw, with the jeweler's saw. But again, the saw's all the way over there, and then I need to get out a bench pin, and for me it's easier to just cut and file. Everyone's got their own preferences on this, so whichever way you choose to do it, I no judgy either way. So I'm going to take my ring and just open it up, and once again I'm going to file. Now since this is a circle, I'm going to angle my file just slightly to my right, because if in a circle the outside diameter, or sorry, circumference, not diameter, that's a different measurement. The outside circumference needs to be a little bit bigger than the inside circumference, just a little bit, in order to get it to fit. Now, if you are a traditionally trained metalsmith, what you probably learned was when you are making rings, you should make Kind of like I did with my wire at the beginning of the tutorial, you should make your ring into a D shape so that your ends are coming straight in towards each other. That eliminates the need to file at an angle. And you can absolutely, after you solder this, re-round it back on your mandrel. But if you can manage to preserve the circular shape at this point, and do the filing at an angle, you're just saving yourself a step. And, you know, who doesn't love saving steps, right? Who doesn't love a little bit of shortcuts and efficiency on the Beading Dream stream? Okay, so there's my joint. I'm going to take my flux, I'm going to paint it on my joint. And I'm going to cut myself another teeny tiny piece of easy solder. I'm going to figure out what the heck I did with my tools. That's true. Boys have a lot fewer problems here in Texas than the women folks do. Alright, so I'm going to set my ring on top of that solder, and now I'm going to do the same thing that I just did. I'm going to do the same thing I just did. It's going to take probably a little less time because it's a little bit smaller piece of metal, because I did cut some of it off. And I'm still going to just heat the whole thing. And then heat my joint, and there you go. So did you see it? Did you see it drop down? So that's your visual cue that your solder has flowed. And then I just put a little bit of extra heat into my joint. So Lorraine said thank you for using the more accessible option. I'm assuming you're talking about the butane torch. Yes, I love my butane torch, and it is so much more accessible. It's so much more home friendly than big tanks of gas. Also, you know, if you have you know, reasonably justifiable fears of large tanks of compressed gas in your home space, you know, that's not actually an irrational fear. Like, large tanks of compressed gas can explode. If you listen to Hollywood, they explode all the time. So, you know, the butane is nice because you really don't have to have any more compressed gas in your space ever than, you know, a refill canister that's this size and what's in your torch. So, I mean, assuming it does decide to just spontaneously combust, at least the explosion will be small. One could argue that there's no such thing as, you know, that all explosions are bad explosions. I'm going to say it's still a matter of scale. Yes, these are awesome, Corvus. You definitely should get one. They are way much fun. Okay, so I have managed to successfully... Are you still hot? Oh, good, you're not. Well, you're kind of hot, but anyway. Yeah, so I managed to successfully solder my joint together. Now, with the twist, it's pretty common that you're not going to get a perfect meeting of them together. Hold on, not being funny, can you use the torch? Not this torch. This torch is just butane. The only natural gas soldering setup I've ever heard is an amazing instructor from whom I took a class a couple of years ago, Q-Fom Gray. In her home studio, she actually has a natural gas torch that's like, you know, like actually piped into her home natural gas. Most of the torches that you use with tanks are going to be oxypropane, oxyacetylene, that's not a word, acetylene, yeah, oxyacetylene, oxypropane, those are your two main ones that people will use with the bigger torches. And the bigger torches they have way more facility, they can be way more precise, and they can deliver way more heat. But once again, then you're dealing with two fairly large compressed gas canisters, which isn't necessarily the most comfortable thing to have in your home. God forbid you're a renter and your landlords, you know, should come in and be like, hey, what's this tank of compressed oxygen doing in your living room? It's usually against your lease to do something like that. So the butane torches are really nice. The limitation of this, of course, is that you do hit a wall with these as far as size go. And when I say size, I mean the size of your piece. There's a limitation to the amount of metal that this torch can heat to the point where solder will flow. So these really are for smaller pieces only. Alright, now I'm going to, so what I was saying is I successfully soldered this together. With the twist, it's almost impossible to get a perfect match. That's okay, because I'm actually going to put my stone over that joint. and hide it, because yay, camouflage. So I'm going to take my flat file and I'm just going to go right on that joint, right where my stone bezel cup is going to go, and I'm just going to flatten. I'm going to flatten that out a bit so that my bezel cup, which is flat, has a nice place to sit. Now I'm going to grab my bezel cup, and I'm using all easy solder for this. Now if you were going to be proper about it, you would have started with medium and then easy and then extra easy, but none of the joints on this project are particularly high stress, so you can totally get away if you want to with easy solder all the way around. So I've got my bezel cup, and a bezel cup, for anybody who is not familiar, are these just little die struck cups that you can use to set a stone. So, you know, I've done basic bezel setting classes where we take the bezel strip and we, you know, bend it around and solder it to the back place. Like, this is just kind of back plate. This is just kind of an all-in-one, you know, espresso version of that particular technique. And it's great for tiny stones because making tiny little bezels from scratch is a pain in the gajwanska. I set my solder on top of my bezel cup right in the center, and then I'm just going to heat this until my solder flattens out. And this technique is called sweating my solder onto my bezel cup. Bam, there we go. That's all you need to do, okay? Don't get overzealous because these bezel cups are very thin, and so it is peridot bezels. What do you mean? Amy, clarify please. The bezel cups are made of fairly thin metal, and so the melting point of that metal is not that different from the melting point of your solder. So, you know, if you keep your flame on there too long, just marveling at the miracle of physics that has just been performed before you, you're gonna melt the whole thing. Ask me how I know, because I've done it more times than I care to admit. Now, I could set this up in a third hand, or I can just wing it, and I'm gonna wing it, which may or may not be a good choice. But I'm going to take a tweezers. Ideally it would be a fiber grip tweezers, but I just have a nice long tweezers, so hopefully I'm going to be able to solder this to my bezel cup before the tweezers get so hot that it's going to burn my hand. Does anybody want to take bets about whether I'm actually going to be able to do that or not?
I hope you can.
Thank you, me too. Alright, I've got the part of my ring that I filed. That's what's at the 6 o'clock part of my tweezers, so I'm just going to rest it right here on my bezel cup. And of course, sweating solder is not, there's no good angle to show you guys this unless I completely move my camera. So we're just going to set that on top of my bezel cup, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to heat this whole construction until my solder reflows and bonds my two pieces of metal together just like that. So by placing my solder first on my bezel cup, you know, that allows it to have, it's not an invisible join, but it's a fairly subtle join, whereas if I was trying to suck solder underneath it, I'd have way more solder on my bezel cup than I wanted. So now I'm going to take this and I'm going to put it into my pickle. So while that's pickling, let's talk about what pickle is and what it does. Pickle is a weak acid solution, and what it does is it cleans all of the crud off of your metal so that you can polish it and make it pretty. So that means all of the flux residue, all of the oxide and fire scale, all that stuff is going to come off with the pickle, and that allows you to do one of two things actually. If you're doing a more complicated piece, it's going to allow you to continue to work on the piece because solder does not like dirty metal. So you're going to reach a point in your soldering process where there's just going to be too much crap on your metal for your solder to actually flow. At that point, you need to pickle it, clean it off, and then you'll be able to continue with your soldering process. If you're done with your soldering process, which hopefully I am, I put away my soldering stuff, so there's always a chance that, you know, I've jinxed myself and now something is going to fall off of my piece when I pull it out of the pickle. But assuming that you're done with your soldering process, then the pickle is going to clean all the junk off of your soldered piece so that you can polish it and make it pretty to wear. And that brings me to a couple of tools that I forgot to mention. You're going to need some fine steel wool, and this is quadruple zero steel wool. You can also use triple zero. I honestly don't find there's much of a difference in jewelry. And then You're also going to need one of these babies, and this is a ring clamp. This is a specialty tool for fabrication. It's really, once you get used to using it, these guys are super handy just for holding anything that's too small for you to feasibly hold with your hands. So I'm going to be using my ring clamp to hold my ring while I set my stone, and then the last tool I'm going to need, see, I always forget tools when I'm soldering, always. Like, it's a guarantee. You're going to need this one as well, which is a prong pusher. So how long does my piece need to stay in the pickle? Until it's clean, and it's not quite clean yet, so that means I have to babble at you a little while longer. So tomorrow night is Friday. It is our crafty cocktail time tomorrow night, so you will not find us here on Facebook. You will not find us on Twitch tomorrow night. You will find us on Zoom with Crafty Cocktail Time from 6 to 8 p.m. That's open crafting time. Bring whatever craft you want. You don't even have to craft if you don't want to, honestly, but it's usually a good time. It's the only time that I actually get to see everybody's faces. Like, you guys get to see my face all the time, but I get to see your faces, and I hear that Corvus has new hairs, which better make an appearance on the Zoom, or I shall be perturbed.
Same.
And as will Heather. We will be two perturbed streamers, Corvus, if you do not show up on Zoom tomorrow night with your new hair. And then Saturday night we'll be back with a basic leather bracelet tutorial, really fun and easy one, followed by a live sale, including more new merchandise, because we have lots of new merchandise, and so we shall be live merchandise new sailing. All of those words were in there. That was obviously not the right order, but anyway, we'll be continuing our sales of new merchandise for at least into next week, because there is a lot of it. You absolutely have no choice, Corvus. I will send the toads after you if I have to. Well, I'm secretly working to get some of the toads back on my side, so I've got a small cell of rebel toads that I could deploy if needed to make Corvus show up on stream. Just saying. Okay, so I could leave this pickle for longer if I was, you know, if I wasn't trying to finish my stream relatively on time. I would probably leave this in the pickle a little bit longer because there's still some black junk on here. I've purposefully chosen a stone for this that I can put in the tumbler. So what I'm actually going to do after I've made this ring on stream is I'm going to tumble it to shiny it up a little bit, and the tumbler will make short work of all of that black stuff. But again, if you don't have a tumbler, and if you're just pickling and steel wool finishing this, you want to leave it in the pickle until all of it looks like this, all right, until all of it has this clean white look to it. Again, no, Corvus, I've brainwashed the rebel toad groups. We do not need to remind them who murdered their ancestors. No, Corvus is trying to undermine my toad army with her own toad queen powers. It's not fair. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my steel wool and I'm just going to buff this. So once again, if you don't have access to a tumbler, there's a couple ways you can finish your pieces. You want to start by pickling them. If you have a rotary tool or a flex shaft, you can absolutely buff this with buffing wheels to get it nice and shiny. If you don't have or don't want to use a rotary tool, just your fine steel wool will give it a nice, pretty satiny finish, right? It's not going to give it the blingiest of shines, but it gives it a really pretty soft shine. So that's a really good example of what it'll look like if you let it pickle properly and then clean it with the steel wool. Of course, this is once again where I've got a little bit too much black still in there because time. And then let's talk about the inside of the bezel cup. So you don't want any steel wool bits in there, but you really don't have to polish it up super blingy unless you're using a transparent stone. And if you're using a transparent stone, then you do want to get in there with like a polishing cloth or something to kind of mirror that finish up. Or alternatively, if you're using something like an opal or a moonstone, a white moonstone, those are things that look really good on black. So you can even drop a little bit of liver of sulfur in that bezel cup, blacken it down, and that'll really help the fire of your opal or your moonstone pop. Those are really the only two stones that works for. Everything else, like citrines, quartzes, things like that, tend to work better with a mirror polish, but feel free to experiment because there's lots of really cool effects that you can actually do just with the backs of your bezel cups. Okay, so now I'm going to take my ring and I'm going to put it into my ring clamp, and I'm using the flat side of my ring clamp. I'm going to take the wedge, it goes in the opposite side of my ring clamp, and I want to get it in there really tight, which means I'm going to smash it. So now my ring clamp is holding my ring for me, so I don't have to, you know, worry about clenching this ring clamp tight. It's holding the ring perfectly well for me. Corvus says, black color is always the answer. I would expect nothing less from Corvus. Now I'm going to put my stone in my bezel cup. Now, if you are in any way unsure about whether your stone is going to fit in your bezel cup, do not do what I just did, which is just pop that sucker right on in there. If you were at all unsure if your stone's going to fit, lay a piece of dental floss across your bezel cup first and then put your stone in, because if it only goes in there halfway and you're trying to jam it and jam it and jam it in there and it's not going down, the chances you're going to be able to get it out again are pretty slim. Now in a small ring like this, honestly, what I would do at that point, assuming it wasn't a particularly valuable stone, is I would just reheat it and pop the whole bezel cup off. You're going to lose your stone, you're going to lose your bezel cup, but you'll probably save your ring. But the best thing to do is not do that in the first place. Now I was 100% sure that mine was going to fit, which it does. You want it to be fully seated in the bezel cup and you want it to be level. And then I'm going to use my prong pusher to set my stone. So my prong pusher is just going to catch the edge of my bezel and then just bring it in and down. So what I want is I want my bezel to start hugging the edge of my stone. I'm going to work in opposition, so I'm going to do this size. Yeah, absolutely, Amy. You just have to make sure that you get, you know, calibrated sizes of stones and bezel cups that match. So they totally make peridot in that. So at this point now I've squared my circle a bit, and now I'm going to catch all 4 of these corners with my prong pusher. Alright, and now that I've done that, I'm going to just start going around and around my stone and just laying that bezel down on my stone. So what I want is I want the wall of my bezel to be mimicking the curve of my stone, and I don't want to see any airspace in between those two. Of course, it's not a Beading Dream stream if I don't whack my camera. And sometimes you gotta put a fair amount of pressure down onto your bezel cup. And funny story about when I first started using bezel cups is I would never roll my bezels over. I would just glue my stones in, which of course anybody who has traditional jewelry training was probably just horrified by the fact that I said that. But what I didn't get is how much work, like how much force it actually takes to get these things rolled over and looking neat. Like, you gotta go around multiple times, you gotta press pretty hard, and since it's all interconnected, you know, a lot of times when you press one side or one part in, another part will pop out. So you just really have to be diligent about going around and around until your bezel is completely laid down over your stone. And to answer Amy's question, this is not malachite, this is a little piece of green onyx, so it is translucent, it's not opaque. And then a trick to get your wedge out, if you just bend it to the side, no matter how hard you smashed it in there, it'll come out pretty easily. And there you have your twisted wire stacking ring. So again, if you want more than one to stack, make more than one, make 5, make 10. They're really fun. You can make your twisted wire in longer increments, but if you make it too long, it's going to be hard to twist by hand. So I don't think I would do more than enough for, say, 2 rings at a time. But if you were gonna, pop out a bunch of these for show or for presents or whatever, you absolutely could make, a larger piece of twisted wire, and then cut it to make, 2 rings at a time. So that's it. That's our Torch Thursday stream for this Thursday evening. It is freaking cold outside. I am not looking forward to walking to my car tonight, but there are no tacos here, and there are tacos at my home, and so therefore the tacos shall motivate me to sludge through the cold and the wind to get to the car. thank you all so much for hanging out on our Torch Thursday stream. I'm Allison from Beading Dreams in Dallas, Texas. We are, of course, an actual brick and mortar retail bead store. We're here on Lover's Lane for all my Dallas locals, Monday through Saturday, 1 to 6. If you're not local in Dallas, you can find us on this channel, twitch.tv/Beading Dream, 5 times a week with complimentary tutorials, except not tomorrow. Tomorrow we will not be on Facebook, we will not be on Twitch, we will be on Zoom. If you've Zoomed with us before, the credentials should be the same. I think I reset that recurring meeting properly. There's always a chance that I didn't, so if there's, you know, Zoom craziness tomorrow night, we'll figure it out. If you've never Zoomed with us before and you want the credentials to join in on the Crafty Cocktail Time, email us beadingdreamsdallas@gmail.com and we'll be happy to send those to you. Alright, I'm out for the night, people. Tacos are calling. Everyone have a great Thursday night. Hopefully I'll see you all on Zoom tomorrow. If I don't, have a great Friday, and I will be back on this channel, twitch.tv/Beading Dream, Saturday evening with a fun new tutorial. Everyone take care. Bye!